And so this series that we are having here, which is really exciting, is in partnership with Grantmakers in Health, which is an organization that we're excited to partner with, who's been working with funders to really learn, connect, and grow. And we have some folks I'll introduce in a minute, but our whole session, this workshop today, plus the two coming up later after this, are all really focused on how do we start to shift philanthropy and grant making and really make it more equitable. And so we have some participants today who we'll be introducing. We're going to talk about how they did that through their organizations, shifted organizational structure, policies, so on and so forth, to really be in service of community, which is super, super exciting. So thank you all for signing up. It's really exciting. There's 61 people on, which is super, super cool. And so I want to introduce a couple of our colleagues at Grantmakers in Health. First is Arpita Jindani, who's the Senior Program Director of Health Equity at Grantmakers in Health. I'm really thinking about all these health equity pieces. Arpita, thanks for spearheading this with us today. Did you want to jump in and say hello? Okay. Sounds good. Thanks, Arpita. Yeah, Arpita was great, kind of really leading kind of all of this and, inviting our speakers today. And then as well, we have Kate Trainer today, who's also Senior Program Director and Strategic Advisor at Grantmakers in Health, really working on governance and operations issues. And so she will be kind of really moderating us today and introducing our panelists. But that's all I wanted to say as the introduction. So thank you again for coming. We're so excited to have you all. I'm excited to learn. I hope you all are too. Now I will pass it over to Kate. Thanks for moderating this, Kate.
Thank you, Christopher. Can we go to the next slide? Thanks. And you can go to the next one. So hi, everyone. I am Kate Trainer with Grantmakers in Health. I'm the Senior Program Director and Strategic Advisor, as Christopher noted. And this is our first session in a joint workshop series that we're really excited to collaborate on with our colleagues at P4HE and Tulane. And throughout the series, we are going to explore how communities and health philanthropy collaborate with one another, and the steps that funders can take to meaningfully engage with the communities they serve and share our power more effectively. And today we're going to dive into the trust-based philanthropy approach, which really, as the name says, centers relationships, trust, and power sharing. So let's move to, I think after this one should be a slide for Erin, and then my first slide. You can keep going. There we go. For those of you not familiar with Grantmakers in Health, I'm going to give just a really quick overview. GIH is a national nonprofit educational organization dedicated to helping foundations and corporate giving programs improve the health of all people. We work with philanthropic organizations through education, networking, and leadership. Our national network is made up of about 220 funding partners of all sizes, assets, and interests. The majority of those do focus their work at the state and local level. And we have, our work is organized into 5 focus areas that you could see here on the slide that are critical to achieving better health for all. And those are health equity and social justice. And my colleague Arpita leads that team, are access and quality, community engagement and empowerment, philanthropic growth and impact, and population health. So next slide, please. So I think it's important to recognize that foundations, community-based organizations, and governmental health agencies often have the same health goals, and we may even fund the same organizations, programs, and people. And this requires foundations to use their resources strategically and to build strong, lasting partnerships with a wide range of stakeholders. Beyond grant making, funders use many different tools to advance health, and these can include convening, providing technical assistance, facilitating relationships, and building the capacity of nonprofit partners. But at the heart of all of this work is people and trust. Next slide, please. trust-based philanthropy is a values-based approach to our work. It leads with trust and it centers relationships. It also calls funders to collaborate with humility and work towards systemic equity. It's about addressing the inherent power imbalance that exists between foundations and nonprofits. And in applying a trust-based approach, funders really work to redistribute power systemically, organizationally, and interpersonally. So next slide, please. So this slide depicts the 4 dimensions of trust-based philanthropy. And the first is values. These are fundamental beliefs that drive attitudes, priorities, and actions. Leading with values helps guide a foundation's relationships with its partners, helps guide their decision-making, and helps foster internal alignment, particularly among the board and the staff. The second dimension is culture. A trust-based culture centers relationship building, and it addresses inequitable power dynamics. It requires funders to intentionally and continuously foster a sense of trust with their board and staff, with their partner organizations, and with community members. The next dimension is practices. A foundation's practices reflect those values and its culture. Trust-based philanthropy invites foundations to assess their internal policies, their practices, their decision-making, and really look to see how they align with the foundation's values and to adjust if needed. The final dimension is leadership. Decision makers uphold and reinforce values and culture. And I think it's important here that you can be a leader. You don't have to be a board member or a CEO or an executive staff, but we're really thinking about leadership across. Everyone can be a leader and really reinforce the values and culture of the organization. And the leaders embody values of humility, equity, and transparency. They're collaborative and they prioritize the well-being of people doing the work, and they do work to lift up the entire team. And that's not just internally, it's when we're doing our work in partnership, what do those teams really look like of everyone doing the work together? So next slide, please. So next we're going to hear from 2 funders who've been on a trust-based journey for a number of years. Jill Miller is president and CEO of Bethesda Inc., which is the co-sponsor of TriHealth and creator of the BI3 Fund. And she is based in Cincinnati, Ohio. And Aaron Switalski is a program director at the Headwaters Foundation, which is based in Missoula, Montana. They're going to share why their foundations embraced a trust-based approach, what it looks like in practice, both internally and externally, and what it really takes to build trust and share power. So Jill, I'll turn things over to you now, and then Aaron will share some reflections, and then we'll have some open conversation and dialogue. Thanks.
Thank you, Kate. I am so excited to be here, and I can honestly say there is not many things I love more than talking about trust-based philanthropy. So I'm so honored to participate. And I love how Kate said it's a journey, because that's exactly what trust-based philanthropy is. It is a journey, a continuous journey. So while we're 7 years in, I don't see us ever arriving, if you will, because our environments are constantly changing, the need of our nonprofits are constantly changing, and we need to constantly be examining our practices. So we are on a journey. And as you can see, this journey has really led our organization to focus in on health equity. So our vision for BI3 is the definition of health equity. We believe all people deserve a fair and just opportunity to achieve their best health, regardless of race, ethnicity, zip code. I don't know if you know, but zip code is a better predictor of your health than your genetic code. And that's just not okay. And then you'll see our mission, which we recently arrived at and the board approved. And this really spoke to, okay, if that's our vision, then what are we going to do? And what we're going to do is advance health equity and fuel innovation by investing in trust-based partnerships. that is the work of BI3. And it's reflected in our core values, both equity, but also that building trust is so critically important. And I think it's also important organizations think about not just hanging the values on their walls, but creating those guiding principles around your values on how you are going to show up, how you are going to use your values every day to create a more equitable organization and community. Next slide, please. So our journey, so Jennifer Zimmerman joined BI3 in 2017, and she's one of my colleagues. And when she joined, I can say that BI3 just started grant making in 2010. I arrived on the scene in 2014. And by 2016, late 2016, when Jennifer came on, we really started to think about, okay, we want to do more than write a check. We have other resources, we have social capital, and there's so many ways we can help the grantees beyond just applications, cutting checks, and reading reports. And so we started to build more of that relational component with our grantees, wanting to know a little bit more about the challenges they were facing and how we might be able to help. And then fast forward in 2019, I was at a Philanthropy Ohio conference and heard Pia Fonte speak. She was from the Whitman Institute, and they were creating the Trust-Based Philanthropy Project. And I remember looking at Jennifer Zimmerman saying, oh my gosh, like what we're doing, it's a thing. There's a name for this. And there we learned about these 6 principles, which you see on the screen. And this is really where the Trust-Based Philanthropy Project started. And it's where our journey really began, is that willingness to give multi-year grants. And I think this is critically important, especially if you're tackling hard problems, because you can't solve a problem in a year. And I would argue even in 5 years, if you're tackling things like poverty, infant mortality, climate change, whatever may be the big, hairy problem you're after. And nonprofits need to know that they have your support more than a year or 2 years, that you're in to solve this problem with them. And you may or may not be structured to just give unrestricted funding. I mean, I think Mackenzie Scott's a great example of just cutting big checks and saying, do with it what you will. But I would be careful to say that is a piece of trust-based philanthropy, but that is not all of trust-based philanthropy. Trust-based philanthropy is doing your own homework, not asking grantees for things you can find publicly. We can look at their 990s, we can look at the financial statements, simplifying and streamlining paperwork. We've really undergone a lot of examination of what are our applications asking, and are the questions necessary, and what do we really need to get down to it. If one of our grantees has to submit a report to the state because they're getting state funding, just send us your report. Don't create another one. Don't go on our system and duplicate efforts. Like, send us a state, we'll read it, and we'll let you know if we have any additional questions. Being transparent and responsive. What do you fund and what do you not fund, and being very transparent about that up front. Soliciting feedback is so important. And we've hired a consultant in the past to hold focus groups with our grantees where we're not in the room, and we can get their honest feedback. What are we doing well and what are we not doing well, and where can we improve? And then offering support beyond the check, as I talked about a little earlier. It's doing everything above and beyond the financial commitment. Next slide, please. So as we evolved in this journey, and as Kate also shared, so did Trust-Based Philanthropy Project, and why they started with these principles, it became even more than the principles. It became building that trust culture within your teams, with your board, with your community. It became examining your structures. What are your policies and things that are in place that may not reflect trust-based philanthropy, even if you feel like you're doing it. And then that leadership component is so important. And so I really like this. I pulled some of these from the Trust-Based Philanthropy Project themselves, but as you think of this conventional philanthropy approach and compare it to the trust-based philanthropy, one is very transactional, right? Applications, cutting checks, reading reports. The relational piece is, we have regular conversations, particularly with our larger grantees, versus having them submit written reports to us. we sit down with them at the beginning of a grant and say, okay, what does success look like for you? What are the key measures you want to measure? And what learnings do we want to capture along our journey together? It's that learning mindset that is so critically important. I think of conventional philanthropy sometimes as a funder decides, okay, well, this is what we want to fund, and we're going to pay people to do the work that we want to do. And I think it's really important that funders pause and say, what are the needs of our community? Talk with those on the ground and understand it, and then see how the community needs align with your interests and passions and your strengths in that particular area. One way accountability, I feel like that's very conventional, like we need to hold your feet to the fire. And I really challenge people to think about this important question. Do you believe that nonprofits are inherently trustworthy? Because when we set up all these accountability and compliance and everything else, basically we're saying is we don't trust you. We need to make sure you're going to do the work you say you're going to do. I really like this adaptation of mutual accountability. So thinking of the partnership, not only what the nonprofit and our expectations of the nonprofit, but what are our expectations of ourselves and what do our nonprofits need from us? It's responding in a timely manner. It's showing up for them when they need us. Again, I talked about this, really designing evaluation and learning with the grantee. And I think it's critically important if you think about evaluation as consider the size and the scope of the grant when you think about how you're going to evaluate. If you're giving a $10,000 grant, don't make the evaluation too complicated for your grantee. If you're giving it $1 million grant, you can get a little more complicated with the evaluation. But I just ask you to really reflect, it's not a one-size-all approach to evaluation. And then the lengthy grant agreements, and we just revisited ours because we are trust-based, and it's one of those things just been in place, we've been using it, but it was like a legal binding contract, like this is what you will do and this is what we expect. And it did not reflect a partnership in any way. It was like we were hiring this vendor and we were going to hold them accountable to everything they promised. And so we rewrote our grant agreement, and it really reflects our trust-based principles. It's not just about what they'll deliver, but what we want to deliver. It's just really focused on that partnership and expectations, and not a legal document. Next slide, please. And then the last thing I want to share is measuring impact. And what we think of as impact is impact through a more expansive lens, for one thing. So your grant is not just having an impact on your nonprofit grantee. It is also having an impact on your organization and the community at large. And if you think about funders, we really think hard about what is really in our sphere of control. It's the dollars we grant. It's the outputs we can count, how many people we served, how many number of lives. But we aren't in the trenches. We aren't doing the work. We're supporting the work. And so we have the sphere of influence, and that's what we think about when we work with our grantees is we're partners in the work. We can be thought partners. We have opportunities to share what we're learning and really work together to achieve those larger outcomes. And then there's always this sphere of aspiration, right? And I'm big on thinking let's think about aspirational goals. And we did this in 2013 with infant mortality in Hamilton County. We had one of the highest rates in the country, and we set the aspirational goal of achieving the national average. In 2023, we did achieve that. Infant mortality is now on par with the national average. It went from 10.8 to 5.5. And for the first time ever, our Black infant mortality rate is in the single digits. So don't be afraid to think aspirationally, because when you can bring multi-sectors together and rally the community around an important issue, great things happen. And then I just wanted to point out is we think about a framework for learning. So there's us, there's our grantee partners, there's the community, and how are we thinking about learning along the way and then using those learnings to keep iterating and building on the foundation that we've set. Next slide. And this is my last slide, and I'll keep it short because I'm already over 2 minutes, but I just want to say a great example of trust-based philanthropy is our partnership with Cradle Cincinnati. BI3 has been funding infant mortality work since 2013, and we're not going anywhere. We have just formulated our new strategic plan, and maternal and infant health is still one of our priority areas. And how we've showed up is we've provided that long-term funding. And as you build the relationship and you earn trust, you're willing to say yes to things. So when Meredith, the executive director from Cradle Cincinnati, calls me and says, "Hey, Jill, Black women in this community need a support system. We want to bring them together and work with them to co-design solutions to our infant mortality. I don't know what it's going to look like. I'm not real sure what we're going to achieve, but we need the dollars to do it." And the answer was yes, let's do it. Because we had built that relationship and trust, and Queens Village is now being spread across the country. And Queens themselves developed the Mama Certified, which is a badging process that all Cincinnati hospitals have signed on to. They're sharing their data, and we are building a stronger healthcare system for Black women where they can feel they will be heard, seen, and receive the quality care that they need. And to capture this, I'll just say that Dr. Meredith Shockley-Smith and I are in the process of writing a book around infant mortality and other wicked problems. And I only share that because it's our collective story that we hope will help other communities as they think about their wicked problems. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Jill. So Erin, we'll turn things over to you to learn more about Headwaters Foundation.
Great. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Jill. It was great to hear your presentation and see so many of the examples of how you guys do your work that we also strive for at the Headwaters Foundation. So the Headwaters Foundation is, we are a relatively new health conversion foundation. We're based in Missoula, Montana, and we serve all of Western Montana. So we did have the really the privilege of being able to build a trust-based foundation from the ground up. And I think that's allowed us to do some new things, try new things, and learn a lot along the way. And I think one of the most important things that has allowed this work to really take shape is the emphasis on building a culture of trust that really starts within the organization. It starts between the CEO and the board, between the board and the staff, and then the staff, you know, has that relationship and trust with the grant partners, the grant partners having the trust of the community. So we really think about that circle of trust in our work, and whether the decisions we are making would be decisions that would be supported by the community. A little bit of background on how we got to this place of starting a trust-based foundation. When our CEO came, again, we had a blank slate at the foundation. And so the first thing that she did was actually go and meet with as many organizations and community members as possible to say, essentially, what are the issues in your community, and what should we as a foundation be doing to address health in your community? And this really was what formed the whole strategic framework for the foundation and our focus on social determinants of health broadly, and specifically our first initiative around early childhood. And if we had come in and looked at it from kind of a research and data approach, what you would have seen in Montana is that we have an aging population, and we have a population that has very limited access to healthcare because of so many people living in really rural places. But when we talked to the community, what we learned was those weren't the things that they wanted us to prioritize on. They wanted to look at how you can build more collaboration and support within communities to work together, how we could focus on kids and focus on solutions that would start early so that we weren't having to focus on interventions, a lifetime of interventions. And so I think that's an important piece of really starting from listening to the community to build out all the work that that we set out to do together. Next slide, please. So one of the pieces of this that I think is a really important both of the kind of culture and structure realms that Kate referred to in the dimensions of trust-based philanthropy is really how defining the relationships of the trustees and making sure that the roles of the trustees were clearly defined. So this is a process that was set early on at the foundation where the trustees really understand that their role is to approve things at a high level. They are not involved in a day-to-day process of reviewing grants and approving those. So they've really put the trust in the staff to develop a broad plan. We call it our program plan. That's an annual plan that describes what the grant making buckets are, what the what the priorities will be for that year or for the coming years. And they also approve an annual set of staff goals. So we share with them what the goals are that the staff has so that we have some internal accountability around the work we do because we feel like as a foundation, we are accountable to the communities that we serve. Yet we all know in philanthropy, there aren't a lot of accountability measures for foundations. And so this is a way that we really want to set up the expectation that we believe we're accountable to communities and give the board the role in helping us remain accountable to those goals. The board is also involved in evaluation and learning, but it's really around the learning part of the work. So learning is a huge part of our evaluation process, that mutual trust and learning. And we have engaged with the board and staff together on a lot of that learning. And that one helps the board really understand more deeply what the work is in communities and also strengthens those relationships between board and staff, which I think are essential to continuing that culture of trust that allows the staff to be able to then exhibit that trust and support to community partners. I will say one of the things we've done several times around board learning is take the entire board and staff to a GIH conference. So we went to the last one in June, and I think we had, we had 16 people there total, which is excellent because it's really important for, I think, trustees to be able to meet with other trustees and exchange ideas and understand that, especially as you're working on something like trust-based philanthropy, it is an evolution. It is always a process. I agree with Jill that, we've been doing this for 7 years as well, but we're not done. We're always looking for ways to improve and continually evolve. And that's part of our health equity journey internally at the foundation too. Next slide. So I wanted to share a concrete example of how we have tried to do a little bit more of ceding power to community in the decisions that we make at the foundation. So this is a particular example. It's an event called Voices and Visions. But what this was really a grant that we made to community partners through the Salish Kootenai College, which is a tribal college here in Montana. And we, sorry, just saw Arpita's comment there. And what we did is, we knew that there was a large community of Indigenous people, particularly living on a reservation in an area where there's a huge geographic span. There's a lot of mix of tribal and non-tribal residents that live on this reservation together. And we wanted to have an opportunity to hear directly from residents around what are the community health challenges and what solutions do they actually want to focus on. So we partnered with the Salish Salish Kootenai College to make a grant where they actually hired a design thinking firm and brought in a firm to train a set of community leaders in design thinking process and then hold a 2-day convening where over 200 people came, just lots of multi-generational. There were young people to elders. lots of different community members that came together, tribal and non-tribal, and they spent the course of 2 days kind of identifying potential, the issues and potential solutions and whittling that down until at the end of the second day, they actually voted on the project as a community that they wanted Headwaters to fund moving forward. And again, this was an example where, it was a project that I don't think we as a foundation would have seen ourselves taking on if we hadn't heard from the community that this is what they wanted us to focus on. So it's a great example of really putting some of that power back into the hands of the community to really understand what is needed and then figure out how we could respond to that. Next slide, please. Jill also referred to this support beyond the check. This is a really important piece of the work that allows for, I think this is the how of how you can also build really strong relationships with your community partners. So we do a variety of things. We will pull convenings together. We have done, we've hosted kind of policy advocacy trainings for groups of partners. We've hosted a narrative change workshop, like a lab for people to understand narrative change. And what we host really comes from conversations that we have with grant partners regularly about the things that they feel like they need and they don't have resources for. So we're constantly hearing the need for communication support and understanding how they can do better communications campaigns, or understanding what roles people play in policy and advocacy. And so these kinds of supports, hearing what they are and being able to respond to them is really a big piece of work that our staff does at the foundation. We don't have a title called program officer anymore. We changed that to the title of resource partner, really to try to embody this idea that those roles are here at the organization really to exist in service to the grant partners and to think about how we can be the best support to partners that we can be. And that's really ingrained into each person, each staff person, as part of that's their primary role, is figuring out how they are a support to those grant partners. But what that means on the kind of logistical side is that work can be done because our staff are not creating RFPs, they are not collecting applications that they have to read through, they're not preparing dockets to take before committees or the board to make grant decisions on. So it's a reallocation of the time spent on some of those processes to really these support processy roles. And we're still learning on that, because part of our practice as well is to do oral grant reporting. So we don't require written reports. We let people know if they have something they want to share, they're certainly welcome to. If they've written something for another funder that they want to share with us, we will take it. But we do check-in calls, or we attend events and do kind of observations and really gather the data about how the work is going through those calls. And so that reporting is really, again, on the staff to take those notes and digest that and align that with how we think about our theory of change and the outcomes that we see showing up in the conversations that we're having with grant partners. I think that's my last slide, but I can't remember. Perfect. Yeah, I have lots more that we can discuss in the Q&A. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jill and Erin. As we spend the next 20-25 minutes together, I want to encourage those of you in the audience to ask questions or even share your own experiences. Feel free to raise your hand or drop a note in the chat, because I know, beyond the speakers here, that there's also lots of knowledge in those of you that are listening and learning today with us. So please, I encourage you to do that. So I will open the floor to questions. We'll see if anyone in the audience has a question, and if not, I have a couple of questions lined up to get us started. So, any question?
There is one in the chat. Kate
Okay,
from Jennifer Chang.
thank you. All right, Jennifer, thank you.
So Erin,
s-
we addressed you first. Do you want to go first?
Yeah,
Sure. Yeah, so Jennifer's question, how are trustees chosen and what accountability plan is made for them? That's a great question. The trustees are, there were some original trustees that came over from from the hospital when our foundation was created out of the sale of a hospital. So there were some kind of original trustees. I think there's only 4 left from that original pool now. But aside from that, the trustees really manage the process of reaching out and bringing on new members. And they have really taken to creating a process where they are trying to have a grid of criteria around skill sets they're looking for diversity on the board, both geographically, with race, with age, with gender. So they're kind of looking at it from those categories. In terms of an accountability plan for them, right now it's really their board self-evaluation. That is how they are evaluating, and they're really looking at questions around, have they shown, have they done what they're supposed to do as a board member? Are they showing up to meetings? Are they participating in committees? Things like that. So that's primarily where the accountability is right now. They do have a practice at every meeting that I think they instituted about a year ago that's been really helpful, where they put up the organizational values and operating principles at the beginning of each meeting and kind of collectively read those as a group. And then they identify what they call the soul keeper for each meeting. And somebody takes on that role, and at the end of the meeting assesses how well did they stick to their operating principles. And this has been really helpful for instances where tough conversations have come up, and it's pushed them to work through their values to actually ensure that they have those conversations.
great, thank you.
Really awesome. Thank you for answering the question.
And then Jennifer, I can add quickly to your question. So to clarify, all of our grant agreements are pretty simple, and they mirror our trust-based values. All of them incorporate flexibility, so grantees can move up to $100,000 within their grant matching budgets as they need. I mean, we give multi-year grants, and we know that we're very flexible, and we'll even change outcomes and metrics as we need to, because the world changes in 3 years. So you can have the best laid plans, but we are absolutely flexible. And we actually don't want grantees to become so myopic on achieving those outcomes that they miss opportunities they didn't know about when we started the grant. So flexibility is a part of every grant we ever give. And we are willing to have those conversations and flex as needed. The second part, I believe you asked, sorry.
How are you engaging communities?
How are we engaging communities? Yes. So we just eliminated our BI through grant making committee because we want to form the review teams that make sense as we need. And so what I mean by that is, if we're going to issue maternal health grants, we want to pull people from the community, moms themselves, into the review team so they can help us make good grant making decisions. So we're leaning more and more into participatory grant making, and we're exploring how we can build that out in the future.
Thank you. I have one hand raised, and then we have another question in the chat. So Christy, you have your hand raised. Do you have a question?
Sure. Thanks so much. Christy Prohl from the Sprague Foundation in Chicago. My question is, I love this conversation. I think it presumes, though, a state of readiness on the part of boards to kind of to at least lean into trust-based principles. My question is, when you have a board that might be steeped in more conventional or maybe outmoded ways of operating in philanthropy, do you have any sort of good tips or tricks or strategies that have worked well to kind of open their hearts and minds to the idea that trust-based philanthropy is actually of mutual interest? Anything that's worked well for you, maybe to overcome some initial resistance or mistrust of trust-based philanthropy?
So, Christy, I can share that I've taken my board on a trust-based philanthropy journey. And I want to be clear, I never asked for permission to operate or approach grant making with a trust-based lens. It's not a board decision. My board approves our strategic plan and our priority areas, but boards shouldn't dictate how you do the work every day. And so I think too many leaders get caught up in, oh, well, my board would never go for that. Well, it might just be your board only knows what they know. They don't know any different because conventional philanthropy has been around for decades. It's really taking this on this journey and educating them around how it looks different and how trust-based philanthropy leads to better impact, greater impact. And so it's a journey you take your board onto, but I would advocate you don't have to ask permission from your board. I mean, you know, if you want to reduce an application, I think it's crazy if you have to take it to your board and say, well, we're eliminating these 10 questions. Would you approve the new grant application? And maybe some boards get that detailed, but then I would say that's another opportunity for you to start to take your board on a journey where they are more strategic in nature and not down in the weeds every day.
Ruben, I see you have your hand up, but I'm going to go to that question in the chat, and then Ruben has a question. So Jill and Aaron, how are you preparing committees to do grant application review with a trust-based philanthropy in mind? And how are you engaging your committees throughout the year more than just, you know, a call to action, which is reading or reviewing applications?
Yeah, Jill might have to answer this. We do not have committees. We don't have review committees. There's another question about our grant cycle. We also don't have grant cycles. So I'll just share a little bit about our process, which is really trying to be out in community, identifying partners, and having a really open door policy for people to come to us right now. We're a little bit in the process of shifting from one strategic framework to a new one that we are rolling out, a new 10-year strategic framework. So we are seeing the need to, we know there's a need to be able to figure out how to get out there further and identify some partners that aren't comfortable with fundraising, that's not the thing that they normally do, perhaps some smaller organizations. And so again, that's where we see the role of our resource partners in being out there kind of in a community liaison role where they are meeting with lots of different organizations to understand their work, figuring out who might fit in. But at this time, we don't have any formal grant cycles or committees.
So we do. But I want to be clear, we've really struggled with the RFP process, to be frank, and it is because, you know, it feels structured, but we're afraid not to do the RFP because we worry about equity and we worry about, are we reaching everybody in the community? You know, do people know about us to even come to us without an RFP process? So it's like something we wrestle with all the time. What we have found is like small RFPs that are very targeted work better because a lot of people, you know, you don't get spending the time trying to fit a square box in a round peg. So that's helpful. And then when we do form review committees, what's been great is we give them the evaluation questions, and those are tailored with a trust-based lens. And then secondly, we include people with lived experience on the review committee. And it's been amazing to see how board members, our committee members have really leaned into those with lived experience to learn from them and give them and share that power and decision-making of what needs to be awarded.
Great. Thanks, Aaron and Elizabeth.
Can
Oh, go ahead, Aaron.
Yeah, I just want to add one more point because we have struggled internally with it as well for the same reasons that Jill shared. You know, we don't have an RFP process, but we have a grant program, one program that's an open application available on our website that anyone can come to. And these are smaller grants. They're $7,500 each. but essentially any organization that is working on a social determinant of health issue, focusing on kids and families with kids 0 to 18 within our service region, primarily, or it's only available to our most rural communities, which is really outside of 4 kind of big cities here in our region. But that is also a way that we feel like we can learn what work is happening out there to be able to then go build deeper partnerships. So it's almost a reverse RFP in that we actually, you know, hey, you're a fit and you get some initial general operating dollars quickly. And then from there, we actually try to do site visits just to go out and build relationships and understand better what work is happening in the communities.
Thank you. Ruben, you've had your hand up for a little while, so I want to give you a moment to ask your question.
Yeah, no, thanks. I can wait though. It's okay. Hopefully it's fast. I'm new to grant stuff, but I'm wondering, question was, based off of technology, from my work, what is your policy of funding technology, even though I might not live in that specific region, even though it's a national technology that helps, you know, any community, population health, and social determinants of health?
I could share a little bit
Yeah.
about how we approach that. So I think we would think about that as a potential like technical assistance or capacity building opportunity for all of our partners.
Mhm.
And his one thing that we have identified though over the years is that it's hard for us to see a lot of one size fits all kind of technical assistance approaches for our partners. And so we, in conversation with partners, have found that what they prefer more is really specific identification of what their needs are and how can we support them with whatever that particular need is at the time. And so we have kind of a philosophy and approach around capacity building that it's really tailored one organization at a time. It's tailored to meeting the need at the time that they need it and not when the foundation decides that it's time to kind of provide an opportunity. And then I would say with technological solutions, there's so many options out there right now. What I am seeing with our partners on the ground is we work with a lot of really small nonprofits that become overwhelmed with one more platform, one more technology, one more thing to add to their team when what they really need is some staff capacity, for example. So we sort of take it on a case by case approach. We're open to learning about all kinds of opportunities. But that's how we've thought about technical assistance for our partners.
Thanks, Erin.
Okay.
So we have a couple of questions in the chat related to using a trust-based approach. How are you really reaching out to new grantees? How are you really drilling down and building relationships at the neighborhood level in terms of your work and building relationships?
So that is one of the things we heard when we did our focus groups on how well BI3 was doing in trust-based philanthropy and where were our opportunities to grow. And one of the things we heard was more grants to smaller grassroots organizations. And so what we did is we formed a partnership with our local United Way to start Black Empowerment Works. And it was specifically for individuals who had ideas or were running small nonprofits or starting up a grassroots organization to get money into those hands because, as we know, historically, Black-led organizations have been underinvested. And so that really was a great partnership because United Way had a bigger reach into the communities we wanted to get to know and learn from and work with. And so through that partnership, then similar to kind of what Erin was saying, the way they have those introductory or go grants and then learn from them, this was our opportunity to really engage in new communities, maybe where we hadn't shown up before. And then we could build those relationships with, and, you know, which has led to bigger grants for many of them. So I think what can be helpful is really figuring out what communities you're trying to get into and work through their trust-based partners. So when we're trying to reach out to, let's say, Avondale, it's really leaning in onto those nonprofits that have built relationships in Avondale and working with them, through them, and with them to build direct trust with BI3.
Erin, anything you wanted to add there?
Yeah, I don't think so. I think this is an area that we have also, we're really thinking about as we shift into our new strategic framework, and we're going to be having new funds. We've had so many long-term partners within our existing funds that it's not been an area we've put a lot of attention to yet. So I'd love hearing Jill's ideas too.
Yeah. So building on that, Corey Hansen had a question about outreach to CBOs and identifying new grantees, but also how that may have changed your capacity building or capital grants.
So in terms, BI3 does not fund capital. So that is a decision we made when we became a grant maker in 2010. So we don't just give to capital campaigns. If we give a $1 million grant, and part of that grant infrastructure is needed and capital is needed, then we will fund it to support a larger initiative. I don't know if that gets to the question, but we will invest in capacity building. And so we did have capacity grants that we gave, particularly in light of COVID, and organizations, for example, could buy the technology and train the staff on how to deliver their services virtually for the first time ever. And so we did support our local nonprofits as they had to pivot. And unlike corporations, like they don't have the resources to just do that on a dime. And so we really stepped in to help them figure out how to deliver and get their services out. So we will do some of that in the capacity building space, but we don't give to large capital projects.
Yeah, it's similar with us. We also don't give to large capital projects. We will, we can make grants sometimes, and organizations might want to use a portion of it to do some facility upgrades or something, and we're okay with that, but we don't do large capital projects. One conversation that we are starting to have, though, is are there creative ways that we can use the rest of our endowments outside of our grant making to support any kind of capital or other projects? And this might be in the form of mission-related investments or low-interest loans. So this is just a conversation the board is just starting to have as they want to explore looking at their entire endowment and how they can move towards more mission impact investing with it.
Hez, you've had your hand up. Do you still have a question?
Yeah, my name's Hez, and I work with a family foundation, and this has been great. So appreciate you all sharing the stories, and really love the framing of the mutual accountability. My question, Jill, you answered it a little bit in talking about capacity, but I'm curious about the capacity building grants, and if you all offer those specifically, and if so, what you have learned or how that has impacted the trust-based relationship. And a part of why I ask it is we started a smaller capacity building program to go along with our general operating grants, and have really found it as a way to deepen the relationship, because there's so much that comes out in those capacity building grants that does not come out in a general operating grant. And we're also, we're learning around process and ease, and trying to practice trust-based philanthropy, not having a whole other grant program. So I'm just curious if indeed you do do capacity building grants, and kind of how that has worked or been a part of the trust-based philanthropy, how it supported it, or maybe not.
Yeah, so we've definitely given capacity grants and kind of in two ways. One is we asked all of our grantees, like, what do you need? And so that technology pivot was something that rose to the top. And so we, issued an RFP to help nonprofits build their tech to be able to pivot and provide services virtually. So that came directly from the community, what they needed from us, and we responded. What we have started now, and it's in its second year, is Data for Equity. And this was something that we found in Texas that we brought here to Cincinnati. And it's really a cohort of 10 to 15 grantees. And we bring them together and we talk about how to look at data, how to disaggregate data, how to look at it in an equitable way to strengthen their internal practices and how they serve their community. And that is more of like a programmatic learning. So every nonprofit gets a grant to use those dollars to support capacity building, but they also have the opportunity to learn. And I think through this, we've taken a trust-based philanthropy approach. And so, you know, many of them got to the end and they're like, don't we have to turn in a report? And we're like, no, we don't need any report, you know? And they're like, you said that at the beginning, but we didn't really think you meant it. And we're like, no, we really meant it. You don't need a report. One thing I do want to say, and I know there's more questions, but one thing that happened to me yesterday that I just want to share with everybody is I was at another conference presenting on trust-based philanthropy, and I was presenting with Meredith Shockley Smith, who leads Cradle Cincinnatians. We've been partners with a long time and have a very trust-based relationship. And someone asked her at the conference, you know, what is your biggest internal struggle or a complication to your relationship, if you will? And she said, Jill holds the power. She has the money and she can take it away. And in that moment, it was just a really real reminder for me that I can never take that away completely, right? And so if I can't take that away completely, I think it's important for us funders to address the elephant in the room and to talk about it and say, you know, we recognize we're giving you a grant, but we really want you to lean in and try new things, and we want to learn with you. And if something does not go right, we are not going to pull your funding. We are in this with you. And so it was just a reminder to me of a relationship I've held for many years now, that is still something she thinks about.
Thanks, Jill. I think that's a really good place to stop. I think we could keep going for another hour. I really appreciate all the questions in the chat and folks that ask questions on screen. So I just want to take a moment, Aaron and Jill, to thank you for just really being candid with us and sharing what you've learned and, you know, what's been hard and what those changes have been like. So thank you very much. Christopher, I will turn things over to you for a final 30 seconds of wrap up.
Yes, thanks everyone for coming. There was such a great attendance. We reached around 100 people, which is super, super exciting. We have a second part to this series on October 9th. So please do attend that one. It will be focused on some of these things that we're talking about here at the end, which is really how do you start to change organizational practice and policy to do the work of trust-based philanthropy. So we're going to spend a lot of time digging into that in the next session on October 9th, same time. And please, please, please do take the end of workshop survey, the little QR code there, the links in the chat. We love hearing what you've all learned. We definitely are responsive, kind of thinking about what we're talking about in trust-based philanthropy. We're responsive to what the collaborative is wanting. This is how this grant workshop came about, is a lot of folks were talking about wanting to learn how to change the way they were doing their philanthropy and grant making. So thank you all for coming. Jill, Aaron, thank you so much for, I learned a lot, took lots of notes, and I'm excited for October 9th. So see you all then. Thanks for coming, everyone.
Thank you.